She thought her secrets were safe, but the judge's verdict turned her world upside down. The courtroom was tense, the air thick with the anticipation of a highly contentious divorce case. Sarah Donnelly, a poised and polished woman in her mid-30s, sat at her attorney's table, her demeanor one of smug confidence. Across the room sat her ex-husband Mark, a quiet, unassuming man whose worn-out suit and tired eyes told a story of someone battered by life's trials. The case revolved around a bitter financial dispute, with Sarah accusing Mark of negligence and irresponsibility, while Mark maintained that Sarah had been deceitful, hiding assets to gain an unfair advantage in their divorce settlement. Sarah's accusations painted a grim picture of Mark. She described him as a reckless spender who had squandered their family's money, leaving her to fend for herself and their 2 children. Her words were sharp, her tone accusatory, and her lawyer supported her claims with seemingly damning evidence, bank statements that showed Mark withdrawing large sums of money over the years. Mark, on the other hand, sat silently, his lawyer occasionally whispering to him, preparing for the chance to present his side. Judge Evelyn Carter, a seasoned jurist with decades of experience, presided over the case. She was known for her no-nonsense approach and her ability to see through deceit. As Sarah continued her testimony, Judge Carter's piercing gaze never wavered, taking in every word and every nuance of Sarah's demeanor. There was something about Sarah's confidence that felt too calculated, too rehearsed. When it was Mark's turn to speak, his lawyer began to dismantle Sarah's narrative. The lawyer presented evidence showing that Mark had been the primary breadwinner for years, often working overtime to provide for the family. They introduced testimonies from Mark's colleagues and neighbors who spoke of his dedication to his family. But the real turning point came when Mark's lawyer revealed a crucial piece of evidence, a financial audit that showed a series of suspicious transfers to an offshore account, all made by Sarah. The courtroom gasped as the evidence was presented. Sarah's confident demeanor faltered for the first time, her face flushing as the realization set in. Judge Carter leaned forward, her sharp eyes fixed on Sarah, and asked, "Mrs. Donnelly, do you care to explain these transactions?" The question hung in the air, heavy with expectation, as everyone waited for Sarah's response. Sarah's confidence wavered as the courtroom's attention turned toward her. She stammered, attempting to piece together an explanation for the suspicious transactions. Those were legitimate transfers. For family expenses abroad, she claimed, though her voice lacked the conviction it had held earlier. Her lawyer shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly unprepared for this turn of events. Mark's lawyer, sensing an opportunity, pressed further. "Mrs. Donnelly, if these transactions were for legitimate purposes, why were they funneled into an account under a fictitious name? And why was this account hidden from both your husband and the court?" The questions struck like a hammer, each one chipping away at the story Sarah had carefully constructed. The courtroom grew increasingly tense as Mark's legal team presented more evidence, emails, documents, and even testimony from a financial expert who confirmed that Sarah had funneled nearly $500,000 into the secret account over the years. The funds included Mark's earnings and even money set aside for their children's education. Judge Carter's expression hardened. She was known for her intolerance of dishonesty, especially in cases involving family disputes. "Mrs. Donnelly," the judge said sternly, "you swore under oath to provide this court with truthful and accurate information. It appears you have done the opposite. Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Sarah's face turned pale, her composure crumbling. I was just trying to secure a future for myself and the kids," she stammered. "Mark was never reliable with money. I didn't want to end up with nothing." Her attempt to justify her actions only deepened the growing disdain in the room. Mark, who had remained quiet throughout the proceedings, finally spoke. "Your Honor, all I ever wanted was to ensure my kids had a secure future. I worked long hours, sacrificed vacations, and did everything I could for them. To think that she was hiding money while accusing me of being irresponsible, it's heartbreaking." The weight of Mark's words resonated with the room. Even Sarah's lawyer seemed at a loss, unable to salvage her client's position. Judge Carter, however, wasn't done. She directed her attention back to Sarah with an air of finality. "Mrs. Donnelly, your actions are not only dishonest but also a blatant betrayal of trust, both to your husband and this court. This matter is far from resolved." The courtroom fell silent as the judge's reprimand echoed, leaving everyone to anticipate what would come next. The courtroom atmosphere was heavy as Judge Carter announced a brief recess. Sarah sat rigid in her chair, her confident facade shattered. Whispers filled the room, spectators speculating about the fallout of her deceit. Meanwhile, Mark quietly consulted with his lawyer, a mixture of relief and sadness etched across his face. When court resumed, Judge Carter wasted no time getting to the heart of the matter. "This court will not tolerate dishonesty, especially in cases that directly affect the welfare of children," she began, her voice firm. She gestured toward Mark's lawyer. "Please proceed with your recommendations." Mark's lawyer stood and laid out a plan to recover the hidden funds. "Your Honor, we propose that the funds in Mrs. Donnelly's secret account be frozen immediately. Additionally, given the evidence of her deliberate attempts to conceal assets, we request that Mr. Donnelly be granted sole decision-making authority over the remaining joint finances. Finally, we believe this dishonesty warrants a review of custody arrangements." At this, Sarah's head shot up, panic evident in her eyes. "No!" she exclaimed, her voice cracking. "You can't take my kids away. I was only trying to protect them." Her plea fell on deaf ears. The judge silenced her with a sharp look. "Mrs. Donnelly, your actions demonstrate a disregard for transparency and fairness. This court's primary concern is the well-being of the children, and your behavior raises serious questions about your judgment." Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she realized the gravity of the situation. Her lawyer attempted damage control, proposing that Sarah be allowed to keep custody while undergoing court-mandated financial counseling. But Judge Carter was unmoved. Turning to Mark, the judge addressed him directly. "Mr. Donnelly, while I commend your patience and integrity throughout this ordeal, I must also ensure that the children have stability and security moving forward. I will carefully review both parties' roles before issuing my final ruling." The tension in the room was palpable as the judge paused, her decision still looming. Mark nodded, his expression a mix of determination and heartbreak. Sarah, meanwhile, looked utterly defeated, her earlier defiance replaced by despair. The once confident woman who had entered the courtroom now seemed like a shadow of herself. The hearing adjourned for the day, but the outcome was clear. Sarah's actions had irreparably damaged her credibility, and Mark now had the upper hand. For the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of hope, not just for himself, but for the future of his children. The next day, the courtroom was silent as everyone awaited Judge Carter's final ruling. Sarah entered looking pale and subdued, the fight seemingly drained out of her. Mark, on the other hand, sat with quiet composure, his lawyer by his side. The tension was thick as Judge Carter took her seat and began to speak. "This case has been a stark reminder of the importance of honesty and integrity in legal proceedings," she started, her gaze sweeping the room. "Both parties claim to act in the best interests of the children, but actions speak louder than words. Mrs. Donnelly, your deliberate deception regarding the hidden assets undermines not only this court's trust, but also your role as a responsible parent." Sarah's head dropped, tears welling up in her eyes. The judge's words were cutting, but fair. After reviewing the evidence and considering the welfare of the children, this court orders the following. The hidden assets in Mrs. Donnelly's account will be transferred into a trust for the children's future expenses, including education and health care. Additionally, full custody of the children will be granted to Mr. Donnelly, with Mrs. Donnelly receiving supervised visitation rights until she completes financial counseling and demonstrates responsible behavior. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Sarah's lawyer placed a comforting hand on her shoulder as she quietly sobbed. Mark, meanwhile, closed his eyes briefly, as if releasing years of pent-up tension. Judge Carter wasn't done. Let this be a lesson to all involved. Divorce and custody battles are not games to be won or lost. They are about the lives and futures of innocent children. Any attempt to manipulate the system for personal gain will be met with the strictest consequences. As the judge banged her gavel, the courtroom erupted into murmurs. Sarah's once confident demeanor was replaced by visible regret and shame. Mark stood, shaking his lawyer's hand, his face reflecting a mixture of relief and sadness. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Mark, eager for a statement. Holding his lawyer's hand up to silence them, he simply said, "This isn't a victory for me. It's a chance for my kids to have a stable and honest future. That's all I ever wanted." As Mark walked away, Sarah stayed behind, sitting alone on a bench near the courthouse steps. The weight of her choices seemed to bear down on her, leaving her lost in thought. For Mark, the outcome was bittersweet. He had fought for the truth and won, but the damage to his family could never fully be undone. However, he vowed to use this fresh start to give his children the love and stability they deserved. It was a new chapter, one he was determined to write with integrity and hope.